What kind of secret makes you run from your own home? My name is Ashley. I'm 26, and I've spent most of my life in a house where I was less than a shadow. My father and stepmother treated me like proof of a mistake, serving my plate last, shoving me into a basement bedroom, ignoring my birthdays. Only my grandmother's love kept me whole, her gentle voice promising, "They'll regret this." When she gripped my hand and whispered her last words, "Check the back of the frames," I thought it was delirium. But that night, alone in her creaky old house, the air heavy with dust and memory, I obeyed. My hands shook as I lifted the familiar frame from the mantel, its faded photo of her smiling. I turned it over. Taped to the back was an envelope, sealed tight with black electrical tape. Inside, I found photos, dates, signatures, receipts, and a deed to a massive Vermont property. Not in my father's name, not my stepmother's, but mine. Since I was 14, my knees buckled. This wasn't just land, it was power, a secret my grandmother hid with surgical precision. I sat on the cold floor, heart pounding like a drum in my chest, the envelope's weight burning my hands. Why had she kept this from me? And why now, when she was gone? The house was silent, but my mind screamed. My grandmother had always been sharp, dodging my father's recent attempts to call her senile and lock her away in a nursing home. He'd been circling like a vulture, eyeing her old country house for years. Now I saw it clearly. He wanted the property, and she'd outsmarted him. I stayed in her house for 3 days, pretending to mourn while combing through her files. Every drawer I opened felt like peeling back skin, exposing truths I wasn't ready for. I found bank statements, letters, and a scribbled note about her trusted attorney. I called him, voice trembling, and he confirmed the deed was real, legally filed, untouchable. My father and stepmother showed up on the 3rd day, asking about the Vermont place with fake concern. I lied smoothly, said she sold it to pay debts. They swallowed it, no questions. That night, my father stumbled into my room, reeking of whiskey, slurring, "You're not even worth what you eat." I stayed silent, but inside something cracked open. I wasn't the invisible girl anymore. I was the heir. I started gathering evidence like a hunter. Old recordings, cruel remarks caught on my phone. Even a hidden camera video where my stepmother hissed she'd only spared me because poison was illegal. My grandmother's house was a vault of secrets, each one a weapon. But the second frame, the ugly one by the staircase she always hated, held something that stopped my breath. I flipped it over, found a false back, and inside, a folded paper with a name I hadn't heard since I was 12. Mr. Whitaker, my old history teacher, fired after a scandal my father orchestrated. A flash drive and a note in her handwriting. He tried to warn them. No one listened. Now you must. My pulse raced as I ran to my laptop, booted it offline, and opened the files. Grainy footage showed my father and stepmother scheming, a voice saying, "If she tells anyone, we'll ruin his career." The she was me. I didn't know what I'd almost said back then, but it was big enough to destroy a man's life. I clutched the flash drive, my hands slick with sweat. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was crime, coercion, a whole network of lies. I remembered a day I came home at 12, clothes soaked, crying, but the memory was foggy, buried by trauma. Mr. Whitaker had stood up for me once, then vanished. I found the number my grandmother left and dialed. An older voice answered, hesitant. When I said my name, he paused, then said, "Your grandma promised you'd call." We met at a quiet cafe 2 towns over. He carried a locked metal case, his eyes tired but kind. "She trusted me to protect you, even from afar," he said, opening it to reveal folders, photos, medical reports, all about me. A picture of me at 7, bruises on my arm, my grandmother's handwriting on the back. Sent to the school. No one acted. My stomach churned. They'd buried the abuse, silenced him, and my grandmother saved every shred of proof. I left that cafe carrying a bomb of truth, my hands trembling like never before. I scanned every document, made encrypted backups, and sent copies to the attorney. Back home, my father barked for a beer. My stepmother clipped her nails, oblivious. They still saw me as the house shadow, the girl who'd break under their weight. But I was already moving, tightening a noose they didn't see. That night, in the garage, I found boxes with my mother's name in black marker. Inside, her journals, photos, and an unsent letter to my grandmother. "He's hurting me. I'm scared." My mother didn't fall down the stairs. She was silenced. Pain turned to rage, and rage to strategy. I was no longer just surviving, I was executing. The garage smelled like mildew and forgotten time, the kind that clings to your skin long after you leave. I rifled through those boxes marked with my mother's name, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust like a knife. Her journals were there, pages filled with her neat script, detailing the fear she lived with every day. One entry stopped me cold. A description of a night when my father shoved her against the wall, his voice low and threatening, promising worse if she ever tried to leave. And then the unsent letter to my grandmother, pleading for help, saying she was scared for her life and mine. It wasn't an accident that killed her. It was him, silencing her before she could escape. My chest tightened, rage bubbling up like acid. But among the photos, one made my blood run ice cold. My mother by the fireplace, hand on her belly, pregnant with me. In the mirror's reflection, a man watched her. Not my father, but someone familiar now as Uncle Barry, his business partner. Back then, he was just a security guard at a psychiatric facility, the same place my father's ex had been committed against her will. What was he doing there? It hinted at a darker alliance, one my grandmother must have suspected. I zoomed in on my phone, adjusting the image until his face was unmistakable. This wasn't isolated violence. It was a network, protecting secrets, covering tracks. I called the attorney again, my voice steadier this time, and set up a meeting. I showed him the photo, laid out the connections. He nodded slowly, saying this could reopen old cases, not just my mother's death, but others tied to their schemes. At dinner that night, I tested the waters. I placed the photo on the table casually, saying I'd found it in an old album. My father froze, fork midway to his mouth. My stepmother glanced away, and Barry, who was over as usual, muttered something about her loving that mirror. But I knew from the house blueprints I'd checked earlier, the mirror wasn't installed until after she died. He'd slipped, exposed himself without realizing. I hid my phone recorder in the fruit bowl and prodded with innocent questions until I overheard my father whisper from the bedroom, "She's digging too much, just like her mother." That recording was gold, another thread in the web I was weaving. I didn't sleep. Instead, I organized everything into a digital folder: images, audio, documents. I sent it to 2 local investigative journalists. One responded quickly. If this was real, it was explosive, but I didn't want the spotlight yet. I wanted control. Meanwhile, the Vermont property deed burned in my mind. I drove out there one afternoon, the winding roads leading to a sprawling estate surrounded by thick woods, the house weathered but sturdy. Standing on the porch, I could almost feel my grandmother's presence, her quiet defiance in gifting it to me. It wasn't just land, it was a sanctuary she'd built in secret, away from their greed. Back home, I combed through more of her files, finding receipts for anonymous donations she'd made to abuse shelters. Always in my name. She'd been planning this for years, a safety net I never knew I had. The tension at home thickened like fog. My stepmother started acting erratic, switching from snide comments to forced sweetness, like she sensed something shifting. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen, asking why I was suddenly so quiet. I shrugged, but inside, I was cataloging every word. I installed a small camera in the living room, catching her rifling through my things when she thought I was asleep. The footage showed her desperation, whispering to herself about that old woman's tricks. It all tied back to my father's push to declare my grandmother unfit. Phone records I found showed he'd bribed a doctor for a false evaluation. But she was always one step ahead. Her lucidity, a shield. I contacted the nursing home he'd tried to force her into. The administrator confirmed he'd offered money under the table to admit her without questions. More evidence, more fuel. As days blurred, I pieced together a timeline. My mother's death at the top, then the quick remarriage, my basement exile, the ignored bruises Mr. Whitaker had reported. I found an old diary of mine in the attic, pages torn where I'd written about a particularly bad night, punished for crying too loud. The memories flooded back, wet clothes from being hosed down as discipline, the slaps that left marks hidden under sleeves. My grandmother had noted it all, stashing copies in that metal case. With the attorney's help, I filed preliminary papers to secure the trust, locking the property away from their reach. They still had no idea, treating me like the same broken girl. But every insult now felt like a gift, ammunition I stored silently. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, I sat in my grandmother's empty house, the deed spread before me. It wasn't just paper, it was her final act of love, a way to say I'd never be powerless again. I whispered thanks into the quiet, feeling her strength seep into me. The revenge wasn't loud, it was methodical, building like a storm they couldn't see coming. And when the first subpoena arrived, slipped under the door in a plain envelope, I watched from upstairs as my stepmother's face drained of color, the crack in her mask finally showing. The subpoena lay on the table like a live wire, the county seal glaring under the kitchen light. My stepmother's hands shook as she read it aloud, her voice cracking on words like testify and abuse. My father snatched it away, his face twisting into that familiar mask of denial. But for once, he had no sharp retort, just a heavy silence that filled the room like smoke. It demanded they appear in court over my mother's death and the long-buried school records of my bruises. Barry vanished from town the next day, his truck gone before dawn. The attorney warned me they were being watched. Extra caution now, as cornered animals bite hardest. The house turned into a pressure cooker, my father drinking more, slamming doors, while my stepmother swung between rage and eerie calm, like she was testing which mask fit best. One night, I pretended to fetch pizza, circled the block, and slipped back through the garage. Through the cracked kitchen door, I heard her sobbing. "This is your fault, Mark. You said she'd forget." He hissed back, "You're the one who buried it all. You wrote that letter." My knees nearly gave out. What letter? I captured it on the house alarm's mic, another layer of confession they didn't know existed. I sent the file to the attorney, who replied starkly, "Enough for murder charges." The press picked up steam, headlines whispering about a cold case reopening, a businessman's wife possibly murdered after abuse reports. Social media buzzed, the town gossiping without knowing it was us. At dinner, they were ghosts, pale, shaking, my stepmother bursting into tears over nothing. She screamed, "This will destroy the family." I met her eyes and said softly, "Family? The only one I had burned in pain you ignited." They stared like I'd risen from the dead. But the real shock came that night in the basement, following a hazy memory of my grandmother saying the house was built on mistakes. I tapped walls with a flashlight until a hollow echo behind old cans revealed a false panel. Inside, a metal box sealed with police tape. Evidence, do not remove. My heart slammed as I opened it. Crime scene photos of my mother's body, dragged awkwardly, staircase too clean, bruise on the wrong side for a fall. The original autopsy lost, according to my father, detailed inconsistencies. No typical fall injuries, signs of struggle. My grandmother had stolen it back before he could destroy it. Her letter inside, "If you're reading this, you've reached the end. Do what I couldn't, smart without mercy." Tears came, not weakness, but fuel. I delivered the box to the attorney personally, his face grim as he said it sealed their fate. We filed for homicide, obstruction, child endangerment. Warrants issued fast. Police moved in, but even as my stepmother tried to slap me over spilled coffee, my father holding her back, it was all on video, domestic violence as the capstone. They were surrounded, clueless who orchestrated it. I was the granddaughter of the sharpest mind in that house, deciding the end. But when the doorbell rang, and an officer handed me an envelope with my name, it wasn't a warrant. It was a prosecutor's warning. The case involved a criminal network with public figures. State takeover, task force for witnesses like me. Retaliation possible. Chill gripped me. They knew someone was pulling strings. I bolted doors, hid drives, killed my phone's GPS. Paranoia, survival. My stepmother rifled my room, found a notebook, asked sweetly what it was. I snatched it back, seeing her hatred. I had to leave. The attorney arranged a safe townhouse with a social worker. I packed at dawn, slipped out without a word, the sky bruising purple. The new place was small, peaceful, doors locking from inside, no watchers in the night. I cried there, releasing weeks of tension. The prosecutor called for a meeting. In her office, I laid it all out, calm now. She said we'd indict them soon. Exhausted but steady, I returned to an email. Anonymous, a photo of me at the sink in my safe house. Reflection showing Josh, my cousin, neutral in family wars. Josh, stepmother's nephew, who'd been kind as kids but distant after my mother's death. He'd called recently, probing my location. Now tied to money laundering in the company, meeting Barry last week. The web widened, wrought deeper than I thought. I messaged Josh, feigning ignorance, needing family talk. We met at a cafe, me wired with a mic, agent nearby. He warned I'd stirred trouble, should have stayed quiet. Every word recorded. Agents grabbed him post-meeting for intimidation. Another piece fell. But home that night, door ajar, perfume lingering, not mine. Footsteps upstairs. I gripped my keys, climbed silently. In my room, my father stood with an envelope, eyes bloodshot. You destroyed us. Your mother was sick, grandmother paranoid, you're the worst. Drunk, desperate, but he didn't touch me. I pointed to the ceiling camera. Police arrived in minutes via my app alert. They arrested him screaming lies from a bitter girl. My stepmother fled hours later, caught with shredded papers and cash, confessing threats for a deal. I refused leniency. Under protection, I moved again. Grandmother's Vermont house now mine legally. Nightmares lingered, but peace crept in. One quiet night, her book yielded a final envelope. Truth scares first, then freeze. I believed in you. The air in the Vermont house felt alive, like my grandmother's spirit lingered in the creak of the floorboards. I sat on the porch, clutching her last note, the words "truth freeze" echoing as I stared at the deed, now officially mine. The weight of it, land, power, her love, kept me grounded as the world unraveled back home. My father's arrest made headlines, the town buzzing with whispers of murder and corruption, but I stayed hidden, piecing together the next move. My mother's journals, found in the garage, haunted me. Her words painted a prison. Locked doors, threats, a plan to escape with me before she was silenced. One entry detailed a night she tried to call for help, only for my father to rip the phone from the wall. Another photo, tucked between pages, showed her by that fireplace, Uncle Barry's reflection in the mirror, a ghost from her past, now a key to the present. He wasn't just a partner. He was the muscle, the one who made threats stick. I zoomed in on his face, the scar on his cheek unmistakable, tying him to the psychiatric facility where secrets were buried. I drove to the attorney's office, the journals and photos in a locked bag. He studied them, face grim, saying this could crack open a second case, maybe more. Barry's history as a security guard linked to my father's ex, committed against her will, suggested a pattern of control. I pushed further, digging through my grandmother's files for anything on Barry. A receipt for a storage unit in her name caught my eye. I found it on the edge of town, rusted lock giving way to a box of old cassette tapes labeled with dates from my childhood. One marked the month my mother died, held her voice, shaky, pleading, "If I don't make it, tell Ashley I tried." My father's voice cut in, threatening her silence. My hands shook so hard I dropped the tape. This was no accident. It was planned, and Barry was there. Back home, I set a trap. At dinner, I mentioned finding an old tape, watching their faces. My stepmother's fork clattered, my father's eyes darkened. Later, I caught them whispering in the hall, her saying, "If she plays it, we're done." I'd already copied the tape, sent it to the journalist who'd called this the story of the decade. The next day, I found a note slipped under my door. "Stop digging, or you'll end like her." The handwriting wasn't theirs, but the perfume on the paper was my stepmother's. Cheap, floral, unmistakable. I installed more cameras, catching her pacing at night, muttering about cleaning up. The attorney filed for a restraining order, citing the threat, but the real blow came when I revisited the storage unit. Another box held hospital records, my mother's, showing a visit for bruising days before her death, dismissed as clumsiness. A nurse's note hinted at fear, ignored by the doctor, likely paid off. The journalist published a teaser article, no names, just enough to stir the pot. Social media erupted, locals speculating about the businessman. My father drank heavier, his temper fraying. One night, he cornered me, slurring, "You think you're clever like your grandma?" I stayed calm, recorder on, catching his admission. I made her shut up once. My stepmother tried to play nice the next morning, offering coffee, her smile venomous. I sipped it, tasting nothing but my own resolve. The attorney warned me the case was escalating. Barry's disappearance suggested he knew the net was closing. I tracked his old associates through public records, finding a name tied to the construction company. Josh, my cousin, recently back in town, always too friendly. A call log showed he'd contacted Barry days before the note appeared. I messaged him, casual, saying I needed advice. He agreed to meet, unaware I was baiting him. At the cafe, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're stirring things up, Ash," he said, leaning close. "Let it go." I recorded every word, the agent outside ready. When he left, they nabbed him for intimidation, his phone revealing texts to Barry about handling me. Another piece fell. But that night, back at the safe house, the door was ajar, the air thick with that same perfume. Upstairs, a drawer was open, my mother's photo gone. I checked the security app. Grainy footage showed a figure in a hoodie slipping out. My heart pounded. They were closer than I thought. The attorney got the footage, linking it to Barry's last known location. The prosecutor called. They'd found Barry's car, abandoned, with my mother's missing hospital bracelet inside. Each clue tightened the noose, but the fear lingered. They weren't done. I locked every door, clutching my grandmother's note, her belief in me, the only light in the dark. But the buzzing phone shattered that fragile peace the next morning. Notifications flooded in. My father's name splashed across headlines. Businessman arrested in decades-old abuse and murder probe. The town was on fire with speculation, but one article chilled me deeper. A missing witness had resurfaced after the story went viral. Clarissa Monroe, my mother's best friend, who'd vanished right after the death, claiming debts drove her away. Now, 22 years later, she'd turned herself in, eyes terrified in the photo. She knew too much. My mother confided threats, called crying the night before. If anything happens, it was him. Intimidated by a following car, she'd fled. Her statement backed everything. The journals, hidden forensics, Barry's involvement. The prosecutor called, voice electric, irreversible now, and she mentions another accomplice that night. My body went numb. The web wasn't closed, someone else lurked. I dove back into my mother's diary, pages I hadn't braved before. Worn edges, trembling words revealed a name. Karen, the babysitter from my early years, the one my grandmother distrusted, who vanished post-death. I tracked her. Last name led to a community counselor at a religious center nearby. Public photos confirmed, older, but her. Eyes locked on me in one image. I forwarded it to the DA. Stay put, we're on her. But I couldn't. I drove, parked outside the center, watched her greet teens. Our gazes met, she paled, bolted inside. That night, a letter under my door. I know what I saw. Thin paper, elegant script, beg or warn. The DA examined it, suspecting Karen negotiating or someone silencing her. Surveillance hit the center. Next day they questioned her. She denied at first, but shown photos and diary excerpts. She cracked. Trembling hands, water request, then lawyer. Confession followed. Called to babysit, oddly that night. Heard yelling. Thud. My father blocked her, threatened life if she spoke. Guilt ate her for 22 years. Her words sealed it. With Clarissa, grandmother's files, rediscovered autopsy. Prosecutor pushed for life sentences. Press hounded for interviews. I refused, wanting quiet honor for my mother and grandmother. That night, I drove to Vermont, porch under stars, hugging a diary, crying freely, no fear of punishment. First time without walls closing in. There, I sketched my story, not for public, for me. 2 months later, trial began. I testified, eyes on defendants, father small, stepmother unrecognizable. Room hushed as I finished. Then, back of courtroom, a tall man rose, retired medical examiner, ordered to alter my mother's autopsy. Original report, fracture not from fall, struggle marks, wrists restrained. Falsified by command from Richard Sloan, then county prosecutor, now political figure. Favor for my grandfather. Honorable man, dead 10 years, who covered his daughter-in-law's murder. Courtroom froze, case suspended, going federal, corruption, bribery, tampering. What started as revenge exploded into historic probe. Father and stepmother just the start, epicenter of rot. I staggered out, world crumbling anew. In Vermont, Clarissa waited, moved nearby for rebuilding. We hugged silently, she shared my mother's joys, dancing in socks, laughing at cheap flowers, hidden poems. That day I founded something new. Inheritance funded a foundation for threatened women, rooms named for silenced ones, central as Ashley, not vanity, reminder survivors win, avenge. Months passed, convictions cascaded, prison, resignations, headlines I ignored. Rainy afternoon, brown envelope under mat, old DNA test. Biological father, not Mark, but Ethan Caldwell. Paper shook in hands, who, why hidden, maybe the spark for it all. Shock numbed me, font faded but clear, test pre-death. House silent, breath held. Perhaps my father knew, fueling obsession. Called Clarissa, she whispered, come over. Her place, box of photos. My mother young, smiling with tall, kind-eyed man. Ethan, college night class, before Mark's trap. Broke off pregnant, told Mark he raged, refused another's child. Threats, surveillance, forced reconciliation, prison home. Tried fleeing with Ethan, he vanished. Records showed him alive in Maine. I wrote letters, no reply till call. I think I'm your father. Voice deep, calm, waited. Met at cafe midway. He stood, tears, hug, pure, no strings. First real hold. Tried finding you, told adopted, mother accidental death. Handed letter from her, for Ashley, when free. But inside changed the night she died. Envelope yellowed, her script delicate. Dated pre-death, if this reaches you, I failed escape. Detailed Ethan love, truth to Mark, his violence, locked days, no light, promise worse if run. Desperate but clear, hoped I'd know not weakness, but fear for me. End revealed second confession, full with dates, names, receipts. Hidden in attic porcelain doll, creepy one I avoided. The confession from the doll was like holding my mother's final breath in my hands, every word a dagger aimed at the heart of their lies. I scanned it immediately, the pages crisp despite the years, detailing dates of abuse, names of witnesses she'd tried to contact, even receipts for bruises treated in secret. I emailed it to the DA's office with a simple message. This changes everything. The response came fast. Indictments would be updated, charges amplified to include premeditation based on her own account. It led to a wave of legal actions, search warrants for the construction company, subpoenas for old associates like the doctor who'd faked my grandmother's evaluation. The prosecutor said it tied the knots tighter, making escape impossible. But even as the net closed, the family breakdowns echoed from afar. My father, already in custody, reportedly raged in his cell, demanding lawyers who couldn't come fast enough. My stepmother, locked away, had a public meltdown during a hearing, screaming denials that only highlighted her guilt. Their world was crumbling, and I felt the tremors even in Vermont. Yet the rising tensions didn't stop at court papers. That same night, returning to the foundation I'd started with the inheritance, I found the lights blazing, doors unlocked despite my careful habits. A single sheet on the conference table, red ink glaring. You thought this was over? The handwriting was disguised, but the perfume lingering in the air was unmistakable. My stepmother's cheap floral scent, the one that always turned my stomach. My body froze, pulse thundering. Who had been here? I checked cameras. Nothing tampered, no forced entry, but someone knew the codes. I snapped a photo of the note and sent it to the prosecutor. Her reply, personal, recent, stay vigilant. Police arrived within the hour, sweeping for prints, finding none, wiped clean. But the paper matched our front desk notepad, meaning the intruder wrote it on site, intimate with the layout. I gathered the staff the next morning, voices hushed as I explained. 2 teared up, 1 quit, fearing involvement. Another recalled a strange woman lingering days before. Blonde wig, sharp eyes. I showed my stepmother's photo, instant recognition. That's her, disguised. The revelation hit like a storm. The police now saw her as a fugitive. How? Digging into prison records, with the attorney's help, I uncovered the breach. 3 days prior to a routine transfer, an emergency medical visit allowed an ID switch. The inmate who left the infirmary wasn't verified. She'd swapped with an accomplice, vanishing into thin air. Planned, precise, but sloppy in traces left behind. Street cameras near the prison caught a woman matching her build, entering a rundown motel, accompanied by a tall man with a scarred arm. Barry, the enforcer from my mother's photo, thought long gone. It was a broader conspiracy than family spite. Ties to the construction firm's shady deals, perhaps bribes to prison guards, a network protecting their own even behind bars. The DA launched an internal probe, uncovering payments from the company to a guard's account. This wasn't just escape. It was organized crime bleeding into my justice. Tension spiked. I hired a guard for the foundation, double-checked locks, slept with a phone alert ready. An anonymous call came that night. Muffled female voice. Open the garage now. See what they left. Heart slamming I did. Flashlight piercing the dark. A brown box, no label. Inside, a cassette tape, my childhood cloth bunny sewn by my mother, and a photo of 4-year-old me asleep in her lap. A private moment, never shared with my father. The tape label, final recording. In the office I played it, her voice rushing out hurried. Ashley, if this reaches you, things worsened, but you survived. I love you. Everything was to protect you. Truth costs, but lies kill slow. It cut, then my stepmother's snarl, 1 more word, and it's over. Authentic, damning, the DA confirmed, her threat on tape sealing new charges. The operation reignited. Barry was nabbed fleeing New Hampshire, resisting, pockets full of fake IDs and notes on my routines. My stepmother surfaced 2 days later in a remote cabin, holed up with shredded files. Arrested, she broke, pointing fingers at Barry for the escape plot. The prosecutor called, in custody for good. Trial accelerates. Family breakdowns peaked. Associates flipping, revealing bribes to the old prosecutor Sloan, expanding the corruption probe, federal. Threats had backfired, exposing the rot. I testified again, voice steady, detailing the network's reach. Convictions loomed, but the air hummed with unfinished edges, whispers of more hidden allies. I rushed to the attic in the Vermont house, the porcelain doll waiting like a sentinel from my nightmares, its glassy eyes staring blankly under the dim bulb. The faded burgundy dress crinkled as I pried open the base with a knife, the sound of tearing paper inside making my skin crawl. There it was, a bundle of folded pages wrapped in plastic, my mother's full confession, signed and dated just days before her death. Every line was meticulous, timelines of the abuse, witnesses she'd whispered to in fear, even scanned receipts for hidden hotel stays where she'd planned our escape. One section detailed how my father had discovered the pregnancy wasn't his, raging that he'd never raise another man's mistake, locking her away until she promised silence. It wasn't just a letter, it was a roadmap to premeditated murder, naming Barry as the one who'd helped clean up that night. My hands trembled as I read her final plea. Protect Ashley. Tell her the truth set me free, even if too late. I photographed every page, emailed them to the prosecutor with a note. This is her voice. Use it. The impact was swift. The DA called within hours, saying this elevated the charges to first degree, irrefutable with a victim's pre-death account. Indictments expanded, pulling in Sloan for the autopsy tamper, my grandfather's estate for complicity records. But the DNA envelope still burned in my pocket. Ethan's name a question mark, reshaping my world. Clarissa's photos had shown him kind, my mother radiant beside him. A life stolen before it began. I hired a private investigator through the foundation's funds, tracing Ethan to a quiet Maine village, a carpenter living simply. My letters went unanswered at first, but then the phone rang, his voice steady yet cracked. I've waited for this call. Let's meet. The cafe midway felt neutral, rain pattering on the windows as I arrived early, nerves twisting like vines. He walked in, tall with graying hair, eyes mirroring mine, soft brown, guarded. No words at first, just a hug that enveloped me, warm and agenda-free, the first in my life that felt like home. We sat, coffee steaming between us, as he unfolded the story. They'd met in a literature class, bonding over poetry, her laughter drawing him in. When she discovered the pregnancy, she ended things with Mark, but he wouldn't let. Stalking, threats, forcing her back under his roof. Ethan tried to help her flee, but one night he was jumped, beaten, warned off by Barry under my father's orders. He searched for years, fed lies about adoption and an accident, grieving in silence. Then he handed me her letter, ribbon-sealed, for Ashley when free. Inside, her script flowed like a river. Love for Ethan, the truth confessed to Mark, his violent lockdown. No food, no light, vows of worse if she ran. Not weakness, she wrote, but fear for you. It echoed the doll's confession, but this one added Ethan's role, how he'd been erased to keep the secret buried. Tears blurred the ink as I read, Ethan watching quietly, his hand on mine. This wasn't just heritage, it was ammunition. The prosecutor wove Ethan's testimony into the case, his scars from the beating matching Barry's known tactics, hospital records surfacing to corroborate. My father Mark's motive crystallized, not just control, but humiliation over raising Ethan's child. The trial loomed larger, federal agents now involved, raiding old offices for grandfather's files on Sloan. Ethan stayed nearby, helping at the foundation, not his carpentry skills building shelves for donated books on survival. We talked late into nights, him sharing stories of my mother's spirit, her love for wildflowers, how she'd quote poems during walks. It healed fractures I didn't know existed, turning the orphan in me into a daughter reclaimed. But tensions simmered. An anonymous package arrived at the foundation, a faded college photo of my mother and Ethan, slashed across their faces. No note, but the postmark was from the motel where my stepmother had hidden. She was testing boundaries from custody, perhaps through lingering allies. I showed it to Ethan, his jaw tightened, but he said, "She can't erase us now." The DA tightened security, tracing the package to a prison visitor log. Josh, bailed out briefly, now rearrested for tampering. Each threat boomeranged, exposing more. Ethan became my anchor, teaching me small things like whittling wood, symbols of creating from pain. The case strengthened daily, the doll's confession a cornerstone, but Ethan's presence made it personal. Justice for a family I never knew I had. The new trial unfolded like a storm, breaking over the courthouse, nationally televised with cameras catching every flinch and whisper. I took the stand again, not as the broken girl they'd shaped, but as a woman forged in their fire. Voice clear, detailing the hidden envelopes, the doll's confession, Ethan's erased role. No tears, no pleas, just truth laid bare. How they'd murdered my mother to bury a secret child, raised me in shadows to control the narrative. The room hung on every word, my father averting eyes, stepmother shrunken beside him. Convictions seemed inevitable, but escapes lingered in the air like smoke. My stepmother's breakout had been no fluke. Guards bribed through the construction firm's slush fund, Barry pulling strings from hiding. Even in chains during pretrial, she'd smuggled messages. One intercepted, "Finish what we started." Threats escalated. A slashed tire on my car, anonymous calls breathing heavy silence. Ethan urged caution, staying close, his presence a shield I'd never known. The prosecutor built the case brick by brick. Clarissa's testimony of my mother's final call, Karen's babysitter confession of the thud and threats, the examiner's altered autopsy exposed. Sloan took the stand under immunity pressure, admitting grandfather's favor to bury the report. Corruption threading through decades. But mid-trial, alarms blared. My stepmother vanished from transport van en route to court, accomplice ambush on a rural road. Guards down, she fled with Barry, who'd evaded capture longer than thought. Panic rippled. The DA assigned me round-the-clock protection, Ethan too. We hunkered at the foundation, doors barred, guards patrolling. That night, a package arrived. My mother's stitched bunny returned, ears singed like a warning. Inside, a note in red ink, blood for blood. Perfume clung, hers. I recorded the unboxing, sent footage to agents. They traced it to a burner phone pinging near the old motel. Confrontations mounted. An undercover tip led to a meet, Barry spotted at a diner, me as bait with wired necklace. I sat across from him, feigning desperation for family peace. His scar twitched as he leaned in. "You should have stayed quiet, kid, like your mom." Every incriminating word captured, admitting the cleanup, the beatings on my father's orders. Agents swarmed as he rose, cuffing him mid-stride. He spat curses, but the recorder sealed his fate. Accessory to murder, escape aid. Interrogation cracked him. Named drop-off points for my stepmother, hidden cash stashes. Raids followed. Her cabin hideout stormed at dawn. She fought, clawing an officer, but was dragged out screaming. Breakdown in custody, partial confession, blaming my father for the push downstairs, her for the cover. No deals. The DA pushed full charges. Witnessing arrests via body cam feed, I felt the weight lift slightly. Barry's snarls fading as doors clanged, stepmother's pale face in mugshots. The trial resumed, their absences noted, fugitives no more. Ethan testified next, voice steady on the beating that drove him away, the lies fed about my adoption. Jurors leaned forward, Ethan's scars visible under sleeves. Karen broke again on cross, admitting she'd seen the body dragged, not fallen. Clarissa wept, recounting the intimidation car tales. The defense crumbled, my father's lawyer stumbling over objections. Closing arguments painted them as monsters in suits, a network decayed from within. Deliberation short, guilty on all counts, murder, conspiracy, abuse, obstruction. Life sentences, no parole whispers. Sloan resigned in disgrace, grandfather's legacy tarnished in exposes. But final confrontations weren't just court. Post-verdict, a letter from my father, prison scrawl. "You won, but blood curses you." I burned it, ashes scattered on Vermont soil. Ethan and I walked the property, him pointing spots for a garden, new life from old ground. Threats ceased, allies rounded up, Josh sentenced for laundering ties. The foundation thrived, women arriving with stories mirroring mine, finding rooms named for strength. I changed my name subtly, incorporating my mother's maiden, a quiet reclaim. Nightmares faded, replaced by dreams of her dancing. Justice wasn't perfect. Scars remained, but it was closure, avenged through truth, not vengeance alone. With the convictions handed down like hammers in a silent courtroom, the weight that had pressed on my chest for decades finally began to lift. though the echoes of their screams during sentencing lingered in my mind. My father and stepmother got life without parole. Barry a matching term for his role as enforcer. Josh lesser years for the laundering and threats. Sloan faced federal charges, his political empire crumbling in real-time headlines that exposed bribes and tampered files dating back to my grandfather's era. The foundation I'd built with the Vermont inheritance became my anchor, a sprawling estate turned sanctuary where women arrived with bruises hidden under sleeves, stories mirroring my mother's journals. We named rooms after the silenced, Clarissa's for friendship unbroken, Karen's for guilt redeemed, my grandmother's for quiet defiance. The central space bore my name, a reminder that survivors don't fade, they rise, rebuild, avenge in ways that heal. Ethan helped expand it, his carpentry crafting safe nooks for therapy sessions, his presence a steady hand guiding me through grant applications and volunteer trainings. We planted a garden out back, wildflowers like the ones my mother loved, their blooms a testament to life pushing through cracked soil. Healing wasn't linear. Nightmares still woke me, flashes of basement shadows or my mother's thud downstairs. But Ethan's stories softened the edges, how she'd hum old songs while cooking, her laugh like wind chimes. One afternoon, we buried symbolic items at the tree's base. The singed bunny, slashed photo, red ink note, a wooden plaque reading, "Here lie truth and memory. Here begins freedom." Dirt under my nails felt cleansing, Ethan's quiet support making it a ritual of release. I changed my last name to honor her maiden, published a slim book of my grandmother's writings, notes on resilience, hidden clues decoded. Requests for interviews poured in. I turned them down, preferring anonymity, letting the foundation's work speak. Women left stronger, some testifying in their own cases. A ripple from my revenge turned justice. Yet, reflections came in quiet moments. Porch swings at dusk, Ethan nearby with coffee. I'd transformed from basement orphan to heir of truths, the girl who flipped frames into freedom. Scars remained, faint lines on my arms from old bruises, deeper ones in my soul, but they mapped survival, not defeat. The property deed, once a shock, now felt like roots grounding me. Clarissa visited often, sharing poems my mother wrote, hidden in her attic too. We laughed over them, tears mixing with joy, rebuilding what was stolen. The trial's end brought resignations across town, cops who'd looked away, officials tied to Sloan. Historic, they called it, but for me, it was personal. Honoring two women who loved in silence, their clues my inheritance beyond land. One rainy evening, as leaves tapped the windows, I sat with Ethan's letter from her, rereading Protect Ashley. I'd done that and more. Protected others through the foundation, where intake forms now included spaces for buried secrets. Volunteers grew, funding from exposes on the case. I reflected on the arc, from trembling hands opening envelopes to steady ones signing convictions' aftermath. No more threats, the network dismantled, allies sentenced or flipped. Peace settled like fog over Vermont hills, my soul on fire no longer with rage, but purpose. Ethan and I walked the garden, him pointing buds, new growth from old pain. Healing whispered in the wind, a gentle close to storms endured. The convictions marked not an end, but a softening horizon where the sharp edges of my past began to blur into something gentler, like morning light filtering through the Vermont trees. I wandered the foundation's halls daily, voices of women echoing softly as they shared their stories in circles of chairs, the air filled with the quiet hum of rebuilding lives. Ethan's presence became a constant warmth, his hands calloused from building, yet tender in hugs that spoke of the family we'd reclaimed. We sat on the porch often, watching sunsets paint the sky in hues my mother might have loved, her poems now framed on walls as reminders of hidden strength. The buried items under the tree grew over with moss, a natural seal on old wounds, while the garden bloomed wildly, flowers nodding in breezes that carried away lingering fears. Scars faded slowly, nightmares giving way to dreams of dancing in colorful socks, laughter unbound. I wrote letters to myself in her journals, filling blank pages with forgiveness. Not for them, but for the girl who'd survived in shadows. The foundation thrived, grants pouring in, rooms expanding to welcome more, each step a whisper of victory. Clarissa joined sometimes, her gray hair catching light as she read aloud from old notes, voices blending in harmony. Peace settled deep, a quiet assurance that truth, once freed, mends what was broken. As stars emerged one night, I stood alone on the hill, wind brushing my face like a final, gentle touch from those who'd guided me. And in that stillness, I knew we had won, not with noise, but with enduring light. The story faded softly, a whisper carried away.